In the cold space where stars are far and silent, a strange signal moved like a whisper between the stars. It was weak, slow, and full of pain. It traveled across galaxies without hope, just a soft cry for help in a language no one could understand. But it kept going, moving without stopping until it reached a small blue planet called Earth. On Earth, no one cared about strange signals anymore. People were busy with life wars, money, and machines. But one man named Eli Carter was different. He was not a scientist, not a soldier, not famous. He lived in a quiet town, worked with machines, and spent his nights listening to the stars. He had an old satellite dish behind his house where birds sometimes rested, but that dish was the ear he used to listen to the galaxy. One night, while drinking warm tea and staring at his old radio screen, he heard something strange. It was not a song, not a pattern, not a machine sound. It was slow, broken, full of strange feelings. His fingers moved fast, tuning the signal, cleaning the noise. The words were not human, but they were filled with sadness. Eli leaned forward, eyes wide, heart racing. He wrote down what he heard line by line, sound by sound, and then played it again. He heard a voice, weak, tired, soft, like it was crying. It repeated something again and again, something that felt like, is anyone out there? He stood up, walked in circles, stared at the signal again and again, then looked up at the stars. His heart told him it was real, not a trick, not noise, but a real voice from far away, from someone lonely and afraid. He could not sleep that night. He kept listening to the signal, trying to decode it, trying to feel it. He didn't know who or what it was, but he knew it was alive. Days passed, and he listened more. The signal grew weaker, like it was fading, like the speaker was losing hope. His friends laughed when he told them. They said, "You watch too much science fiction." Eli, go outside, get some sun, but he couldn't let it go. He felt a strange connection, like this was meant for him, like the voice was calling only him. He began replying slowly, carefully, using simple tones and beeps. He built a small program that sent back one short message again and again. I hear you, I hear you, I hear you. He sent it every hour for 3 days, then waited, eyes red, sleep, forgotten meals, cold heart heavy. On the fourth day, something changed. The signal stopped, then started again, but this time, it was different. It was faster, stronger, more focused. The alien voice had returned, and it was responding to his message. It tried to repeat his words in its own way. Slowly, he could hear it say, "I hear you too, Eli," cried, then just small tears rolling down his face as he smiled. Alone in the dark room, he was not alone anymore. Somewhere in the stars, someone heard him, someone answered, and someone was alive. He spent the next week building a better translator. He used all his savings to buy better equipment. He didn't tell anyone this time, not the news, not the internet, not even his brother. He knew they wouldn't understand. He just worked in silence, talked to the signal, shared stories, shared music, shared words. He taught it simple English, and it replied with strange symbols and sounds, slowly learning, growing, changing. Then came the question from the alien voice, one short line that made him freeze. "Can you help you?" Didn't answer right away. He stared at the screen, hand shaking, thoughts racing. What could he do? He was just one man. He had no spaceship, no army, no money, but his heart already knew the answer. Yes, he typed slowly, "Yes, I will help you." In the silence that followed, a soft sound came through the radio. It was not a word, not a phrase. It was a soft sound, like a breath, like relief, like a broken soul starting to hope again. Eli looked up at the night sky, stars blinking cold and far, but now they felt closer, like someone was watching, like someone was waiting. And so it began. One man, one alien voice, and a message that would change the fate of two worlds forever. Asterisk, far away on a dying planet covered in ash and silence, the alien girl La sat in the ruins of what was once a great hall. The ceilings had fallen, the walls were cracked. The air smelled of dust and sadness, but in her hands she held a small device, blinking weakly with light, the same device that had just whispered something new, a sound from far across the stars, a message that said, "I hear you." Her heart beat faster than ever before, her fingers trembling as she listened again and again. The words were strange, but they were real. Someone had heard her. Someone was out there. Someone had answered her cry for help. The others sat around her, their eyes sunken, their bodies thin. The war had taken everything. Their food, their skies, their homes, and their hope. Ciela stood up and spoke in a soft voice full of fear and wonder. She said, "We are not alone anymore." The others listened but said nothing. They had heard such stories before. They had believed in rescue long ago, but now they were only waiting for the end. They had sent the signal out of tradition, not expectation, but Ciola felt different. This voice was real. This connection felt alive. Back on Earth, Eli Carter sat near his computer, his fingers flying across the keyboard as he tried to send more information, more simple words, more kind sounds. He used drawings, short phrases, and even music. He hoped they could feel what he felt. The wish to help, the need to connect. His messages grew longer. He explained where he was, who he was, what Earth was like. He told them about trees and rivers and children playing in green fields. He shared his favorite sounds, the songs of birds, the laughter of people, the wind through leaves. He sent pictures and videos using the tiny satellite he had hacked and rebuilt with his own hands. La and her people gathered around their own screen, watching in silence as colors they had never seen moved before their eyes. Blue water falling from high places, golden sunlight touching soft hills, stars shining over calm oceans. They wept, not because of pain, but because something beautiful still existed in the universe. She responded with their own stories. She sent images of their planet before the fall. Wide towers, glowing cities, deep forests, and smiling faces now gone. She told of how war had come from the sky, how machines had burned their homes, how the stars had turned cold, and how they had hidden underground with only shadows for company. Eli read every message with care. He could feel their pain, and he wanted to do more. He went to old friends in secret, asked for help, got parts from scrapyards, and built a small delivery pod, a fragile metal bird with solar wings and a chamber for supplies. He packed it with protein packs, water filters, seeds, and a single letter written by hand that said, "You are not forgotten." He launched it using an old weather balloon and a booster engine built from spare rockets. He had no permission, no support, only heart and hope. As the pod rose high above Earth, clouds kissed its sides, and then it was gone, shooting into the dark, heading toward the coordinates they had sent. The journey was long, but the alien planet still had one working beacon. It guided the pod through dust and silence and fire. When it landed near the old ruins, the people gathered around in shock. They had never seen anything fall from the sky that was not a weapon. Selah opened it slowly, her hands shaking. Inside were boxes of food, packets of clean water, sealed instructions, and the letter. She held the letter close and read it again and again. "You are not forgotten." Tears fell from her eyes, and others began to cry. 2 old ones, young ones, even the strongest fell to their knees. Not from weakness, but from the weight of sudden hope. That night they lit a fire for the first time in years. They ate together. They laughed. They remembered songs they had forgotten. They danced slowly under the broken sky, and Sayala looked up, knowing someone was watching. Back on Earth, Eli sat quietly watching the tiny blinking light that told him the pod had arrived. He waited for hours. Then a signal came. It was not words, it was music, a soft sound, a gentle tune. It was the same melody he had sent, now played back with strange instruments and voices added. It was their thank you, their way of saying, "We are still here." Leaned back in his chair, eyes wet, heart full, knowing he had done something good, something real. The world still did not know. The government still had no idea, and he still had nothing but an old house and an open heart. But somewhere in the stars, a people had smiled tonight because of him, and he would not stop now. Cold wind moved through the empty halls of the Valari command dome as Sayala stood in front of the last working ship, her eyes filled with both courage and fear. Her people stood behind her, silent and watching with mixed hearts, some full of hope, others afraid to dream again. They had spent years underground, hiding from storms and machines, and now this moment felt like standing at the edge of a cliff with stars below. The small ship was old, scratched, and tired, like the people who had built it had not flown in years, its systems weak and broken, its fuel barely enough for one jump across the stars. Ciela knew the risks. She knew it might fall apart halfway. She knew she might not reach the blue world that had sent them food and warmth and kindness, but she had decided, and nothing would stop her. Now Eli Carter on Earth waited with tools in his hands and worry in his heart. He had sent another message, this time with landing coordinates and weather data and a quiet wish for safety. He had spent the last week preparing his garage, turning it into a shelter, turning it into a place where someone not from Earth could feel safe, welcome, and seen. He placed blankets, soft lights, clean clothes, and a map of Earth taped to the wall with small hearts drawn on it. As the ship left, the Valari moon dust rose into the black sky. The engines shook the ground, and the last power lines sparked with blue light. The children watched in silence, some reaching out their hands as if Trying to touch her one last time, the old ones whispered prayers to forgotten stars, and the leaders closed their eyes, not wanting to see another loss, but in her heart, Sayala carried every one of them, every voice, every memory, every tear she had seen, and she flew for them. The journey was hard, full of silence and sparks. The ship groaned and lights blinked out one by one. The stars outside looked so calm, but inside everything was chaos: wires, loose oxygen, low gravity, unstable the navigation. Systems flickered and her hands shook as she guided the ship through asteroid belts and solar winds, following the thin signal from Eli's transmitter. Her eyes stayed open for days, her lips cracked and her body weak, but her will burned like fire back on Earth. Eli watched the radar screen as the signal moved closer. Every hour the light became stronger and the frequency clearer. He could not sleep, he could not eat. His heart beat like a drum as he watched the final countdown begin. Then it happened. A red alarm blinked and the signal changed. The ship had entered Earth's atmosphere, but it was coming in too fast, too hot, and too low. He jumped into his truck with a laptop on the seat and a radio in his hand, driving fast to the field he had chosen for landing. His tires kicked up dirt and his eyes searched the sky. Then he saw a streak of fire across the blue sky, falling faster than it should. The wings were shaking pieces, breaking off, the trail of smoke behind it growing longer and darker. He grabbed his radio and screamed coordinates, trying to guide her down, trying to slow the fall, trying to do something, anything. The ship turned slightly, adjusted its angle, and headed toward the flat land near the river. Trees bent from the force, birds flew away, and then with a sound like thunder, it crashed into the ground. Metal bent, fire sparked, and the earth shook. Eli ran toward the smoke, coughing and waving his arms. The heat burned his skin, but he did not stop. He reached the broken hull and started pulling open the door. It was jammed, melted, and sharp, but he used a crowbar and a stone and his bare hands, until finally with a loud crack it opened and silence filled the air inside. It was dark. He called out, but no voice came. He climbed in, pushing wires aside, stepping over broken panels, and there in the back corner, under a torn seat, he saw her. Sayala curled up, arms around her legs, eyes closed, body still. He moved closer, heart breaking, afraid she was gone. He touched her shoulder and her eyes opened slowly, her pupils wide, her lips dry, but she whispered one word, Earth. He smiled through tears, lifted her carefully and carried her outside into the sunlight. For the first time in her life she felt warm air, blue sky and real wind. Her eyes blinked fast, her skin glowing softly in the light. Eli wrapped her in a blanket, whispered, "You made it," and sat beside her on the ground. They sat together in silence. One human, one alien, both broken, both brave, and above them the stars were watching quietly as the first real step of something new had begun. Morning sunlight broke through the trees as Eli slowly drove his truck back toward his house. The alien girl, Sayala, sat beside him, wrapped in a soft blanket, her eyes wide as she watched birds fly above and leaves dancing with the wind. Her hands rested on her lap, still trembling from the crash, her skin pale, but slowly warming under the golden light. She said little, but her eyes spoke of wonder, fear, and something deeper that words could not explain. Eli's heart ached every time he looked at her. She had risked everything to come here, and now she was in a world that would not understand her. He parked behind the garage, quickly opened the secret door and helped her inside. He had cleaned the space, added small touches to make it feel like home: lights, blankets, music from an old radio, and pictures of oceans and trees taped to the wall. She touched everything gently, like each object was a treasure. For the next few days, Eli taught her simple words using drawings and sounds. They shared food, mostly soft bread, fruits, and warm soup. He tried to explain human customs with gestures and laughter, and she picked up words quickly, her voice soft and musical, her smile rare but full of light. When it came, she pointed at the stars on the wall and asked home, then pointed at the earth on the map and whispered, "Safe." He nodded every time and answered, "Yes, this is safe," but the world outside was changing fast. A farmer had seen the falling ship. A child had recorded the fire trail with a phone and posted it online. News channels began talking about a strange object falling from space. Some said meteor, others said secret weapon, some even claimed alien, but no one had proof, and governments began to search the skies. One evening, Eli heard a knock at his front door. Two men in suits asked questions about strange lights and satellite signals. He smiled politely, said nothing unusual here, and closed the door with shaking hands. He ran to the garage and told Sayala They must be careful, she nodded and helped him cover the windows, hide the ship pieces, and stay quiet when the nights grew cold. The pressure grew stronger. Drones began scanning nearby fields. Black cars passed by more often, and once Eli saw a man standing near his fence holding a camera. He knew the secret would not last forever. He sent a message to the online world under a fake name saying the alien was peaceful, saying she was a girl alone, and asking people to understand, but the internet turned wild. Some people offered love and hope, but others shouted lies, hate, and fear. Soon, a group of angry people came to his street with signs saying, "Protect Earth, no aliens allowed, go home, alien monster." They shouted and threw rocks at his fence while Selah watched from a small window, her hands shaking again and her eyes full of tears. Eli held her close and promised they would leave soon, find a safer place, find people who still believed in kindness. That night he packed a few bags, loaded supplies into his truck, and covered the windows with blankets. He placed Selah in the back seat, handed her a notebook filled with pictures and words, and told her to keep reading, stay quiet, and trust him. They drove away under the cover of darkness, avoiding main roads and using old paths through forests and hills. As the stars shone above them, Selah whispered questions about why humans were afraid, why kindness turned into fear, why someone would hate without knowing. He tried to answer, but his voice cracked. He said, "People fear what they do not understand, and sometimes fear grows louder than love, but not always, not forever." They reached a small cabin deep in the woods, a place Eli's grandfather once used for fishing and thinking he cleaned. It quickly lit a fire and made her a bed from soft pillows and warm sheets. She looked around, touched the wooden walls, and smiled a little, saying, "Safe again." He nodded and said, "Safer than before." Days passed in silence. Birds sang, rivers flowed, and they lived quietly, reading, drawing, sharing stories. She told him about her world before the war, about gardens with floating lights, about songs made with color, about skies that never ended. He listened like a child hearing magic for the first time, and in return, he told her about human dreams, about space travel, old myths, and the wish to find others among the stars. But deep inside he knew this peace would not last forever. Someone had tracked his messages. Someone was watching, and soon they would come with questions and fear and orders to take her away. And he could not let that happen, not after all they had shared, not after all she had suffered. So he began to plan a way to protect her, a way to show the world her truth, not through reports or scientists, but through her own voice, her own story, her own heart, because sometimes a voice can break through fear, sometimes truth can shine, even in the darkest places, and sometimes one girl from a dying planet can remind an entire world what it means to care. The morning began with silence in the forest, the kind of silence that makes the birds quiet and the wind still. Eli stood by the window of the old cabin, holding his breath as he watched shadows moving through the trees. His heart pounded with every step they took closer. Black uniforms glinting between the branches, radios crackling softly, boots pressing against fallen leaves. It was not a dream, it was real. They had come. He turned around quickly, eyes meeting Selah, who sat reading her notebook. Her head tilted as she traced the word freedom again, and again she looked up and saw his face, pale, tight, serious, without needing words. She knew what was happening. They were no longer safe. Eli moved fast, pulling open the cabinet on the floor, lifting out 2 bags packed with supplies, maps, batteries, food, and one old photograph of his parents with him as a child. He handed Selah a jacket and pointed toward the back door. She nodded without fear and followed him into the woods. The trees were thick, the path narrow and twisted, but Eli knew every step. He had come here since he was a boy, and now these old trails became lifelines. He guided her down into the valley where a hidden river flowed and an old fishing boat waited, covered in moss and leaves. They pushed the boat into the water, climbed in, and let the current carry them downstream, branches above their heads filtering the light like stained glass. The water splashed gently against the sides and frogs croaked in the distance, but behind them the forest was waking up with noise, dogs barking, orders being shouted, and the hum of drones in the sky. Selah sat low in the boat, her eyes scanning the sky, her hands clutching the notebook Eli had given her, pages filled with memories and meanings and dreams. She whispered questions he could not answer, and he whispered back that they would be okay, that they just needed time, just needed space, just needed to reach the town on the other side after hours of drifting. They pulled ashore near an abandoned train station. Eli helped her out of the boat, and together they walked through broken buildings and silent rail lines. He remembered this place from his youth, now covered in vines and rust, but it still held safety for now. They climbed into a rail car filled with hay and old tools and rested there. As the sun began to set, he gave her an apple and smiled as she took slow bites, amazed by the taste, amazed by the kindness, amazed that even while hunted, someone could still offer her food without asking anything in return. That night, as the stars returned and the moon rose high, Eli lit a small fire hidden deep inside the car using stones and old paper. He showed her how humans once told stories around flames. And she began to speak of her people, of how their sky once held colors like music, of how laughter was a language stronger than war, of how stories kept them alive even when machines took everything else. He listened and recorded her voice using an old recorder powered by solar cells. He knew he had to let the world hear her, not through news, not through lies, but through her own truth, her voice raw and clear and full of life. But peace never stays long for those running just before dawn. The station lights flickered. Red eyes scanned the dark soldiers with trackers closed and slowly searching, scanning, whispering orders into radios. Eli shook her awake, pressed the recorder into her hands, and whispered, "We move now, no sound, no fear. Just follow me." They slipped out through the other side of the car, into the tall grass, where the morning dew clung to every leaf. Their steps were soft, but the searchers were faster this time. They had dogs now, and heat sensors, and machines that did not tire. Eli grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the fence at the edge of the property. He threw a bag over first, then helped her climb. She stumbled once, but he caught her and pushed her over just as lights flashed behind them. A voice shouted, "Freeze," and a shot rang out, not at them, but into the air, a warning. Eli jumped after her, grabbed the bag, and ran through the narrow streets of the forgotten town where windows had no glass and doors hung loose. They found a hole in a wall and ducked inside, hearts pounding, breath short, and the recorder still clutched in her hand. Inside the darkness, Eli looked at her, eyes wide with fear, and asked if she was hurt. She shook her head and then smiled, a small smile full of fire, full of something stronger than fear. He smiled back, wiped his forehead, and said they would try again tomorrow. They would find a way out. They would keep running if they had to, because the world needed to hear her, because she had come too far to be silenced now. And somewhere deep inside both of them, a thought was growing stronger, louder, unbreakable. They were no longer just running, they were fighting for something bigger than both of them, something that could change everything. Rain fell slowly over the quiet rooftops as Eli sat near a dusty table inside a hidden room deep under the oldest library in the nearby city. The lights above flickered with age, and the air smelled like forgotten paper and old wood. He placed a small device on the table, then looked across at Sayela, who stood near a broken globe tracing the shape of the earth with her fingertips. She had learned so many words by now, her voice growing stronger each day, her smile returning more often, her laugh soft and warm, like morning light. Eli had found a small group of students in the city who believed him, who listened to Sci-Fi and helped build a network of people ready to show her message to the world. They had recorded her voice telling the story of her people, from peace to war, from gardens to fire, from light to darkness. She spoke about the hunger, the fear, the silence, and how one voice from Earth reached them when everything else had failed. Eli had added subtitles and music, soft tones to carry her words across every screen, every phone, every heart. Tonight, they would send the message live, not through the news, not through politics, but through every platform that existed, every corner of the web, every screen that would listen. Eli checked the timer again. 2 minutes left, his hands shaking, his breath shallow. Ciela stepped closer, touched his hand, and whispered together. He nodded and pressed the button. The signal left the old room, rose through antennas, bounced off satellites, and landed on phones and laptops across the globe. People scrolling through their screens stopped as the video began. No title, no intro, just a soft voice and deep eyes. She spoke not as a leader or a warrior, but as a girl who had seen too much, who had lost everything, and still chose to believe in kindness. Her words cut through the noise of the world and reached people sitting in kitchens, in offices, on buses, in classrooms, in dark bedrooms, and quiet hospitals. The reaction was slow, then sudden comments poured In messages of love, of shock, of guilt, some cried, others argued, some refused to believe, but most listened again and again and again. Eli watched the screen as views climbed faster than he had dreamed. A single video, now a wave that could not be stopped. People began to gather in streets, holding candles, holding signs, saying let her stay, saying she matters, saying humanity means more than fear. News anchors picked it up, governments held meetings, scientists debated, experts shouted, but the people kept marching, not for war, not for hate, but for one alien girl who told the truth better than any speech ever could. Then came the call from the highest office in the country. Eli stood in the middle of a small kitchen, holding the phone close, while Sayela waited near the window, watching rain trace lines on the glass. The voice on the line said, "Bring her in safely, or we will come for both of you. This is your final warning." Eli hung up, walked to her, and told her everything. She nodded slowly and asked, "What now?" He looked at her face, full of trust and fear and something deeper, and he knew what had to be done. He reached into his bag, pulled out an old notebook with a hidden plan, a ship built from old blueprints, from spare parts hidden in a farm hangar just outside the city. He had been building it quietly for months, just in case, just in hope. They drove under moonlight roads, wet and shining with reflections of red tail lights. The hangar door opened with a soft creak, and inside stood the small silver craft shaped like a bird, ready to fly again. Eli showed her the controls, explained the path, explained the risk, explained the silence she would face once the engine started. He said he would guide her from the ground, that she could return home or find another world or build something new far from fear. But she looked at him, eyes full of light, and shook her head. She said, "Not without you." He smiled, tears forming as he whispered, "I was afraid you would say that." Then he took her hand, stepped into the ship, and began the countdown as engines hummed and lights blinked across the panels. A loud knock echoed on the hangar doors, followed by voices and footsteps. The ground trembled as vehicles arrived, and the air filled with tension. They sat side by side in the cockpit, holding hands as the clock reached zero. The floor shook harder, the ship rose slowly, wind swirling dust in circles below, and then with a burst of fire and light they were gone, rising through clouds, rising above fear, rising into a sky that now carried their story to every corner of the earth. The stars stretched wide around the ship as it drifted through the silence of space, silver panels glowing softly under the light of distant suns inside the cabin. Sayala sat near the window, her eyes tracing constellations, her breath calm, her heart still, holding the weight of everything they had left behind beside her. Eli adjusted the controls, checked the systems, and smiled as he watched her face filled with peace. They had traveled for weeks, moving between stars, crossing through gravity fields, avoiding patrols and broken satellites. The ship, held together with tape wires and hope, moved like a bird learning to fly again. Every night they slept side by side, surrounded by humming engines and blinking lights, sharing stories, dreams, and quiet moments of laughter in a world without Warsela marked their journey on a small screen, drawing shapes to represent planets and moons, and once she drew a small blue heart near the edge of a glowing star. She called it Earth. Eli added a second heart near hers and named it home, not just a place, not just a planet, but a promise. Then, one morning, the screen blinked with a soft tone, a signal long forgotten and rarely used, an old frequency from the Valari moon, still alive, still calling. Eli boosted the signal, cleaned the static, and opened the channel. A voice came through, weak but clear, saying, "Welcome back." They followed the signal through a thin corridor of light, arriving at the edge of a crater filled with green domes and silver towers glowing gently under a red sun. The ruins were gone, replaced by gardens, clean water, wind towers, and the sound of laughter echoing through the valleys. The Valari were rebuilding, stronger, wiser, softer. Ciela stepped out of the ship first, her feet touching soil for the first time in years, her eyes filled with tears as children ran toward her, calling her name. Elders followed behind, holding flowers, lights, and songs, their voices blending in harmony that carried across the hills. They touched her hand, placed a crown of woven stars on her head, and sang, "Welcome home." Eli stood beside her, unsure at first, his human clothes torn, his hands rough, his eyes tired. But when one small child ran up and hugged him without fear, without question, he knelt down, hugged back, and knew he was no longer an outsider. He was one of them now, part of something bigger than borders or blood. They spent the next months teaching, building, planting seeds, and sharing knowledge. Eli introduced tools, blueprints, medicine, and even music. Sila taught him how to speak with light, how to shape metal with sound, and how to dance under twin moons together. They designed new homes blending earthwood with Valari crystal, using sunlight to power everything from cooking stones to floating lights. Each home carried two flags, one of Earth and one of Valari, tied together by a thread of gold. Soon, messages from Earth arrived carried by soft probes and curious satellites. Scientists, artists, even children sent videos, letters, and questions, some asking how they could help, others simply saying thank you. One message showed a group of students painting a mural of Ciela, holding hands with Eli under a sky full of stars, with words written above that said, "Kindness is louder than fear." A council was formed with both human and Valari voices working together. On trade, education, and travel, they named it the Circle of Two Worlds and made their first rule simple: always listen. For Ciela and Eli were asked to lead, but they chose instead to remain teachers, builders, and friends. They visited schools, told their story, answered questions, and planted trees on every visit as a symbol of new beginnings. One night, as they sat on a hill watching stars fall across the sky, Ciela leaned against Eli and whispered, "Do you miss Earth?" He looked up at the sky, thought for a moment, and said, "I do, but not in a sad way. I miss the sound of rain, the smell of soil after a storm, the songs of birds in the morning. But here I found something. I never had there a family, a future, and someone worth crossing galaxies for." She smiled, reached for his hand, and said, "Then we are both home." Now, and far above them, the stars blinked slowly, like old friends watching quietly, knowing that something rare had happened. Not a war, not a conquest, but a bridge, a bond, a new beginning, written not in fire, but in care, in choice, in the courage of two hearts that refused to give Upas. The wind moved through the glowing grass, and children's laughter echoed across the valley. The story of Eli and Ciela lived on, not just in books or broadcasts, but in every hand held, every wall painted, every meal shared, every voice that chose love over fear. And so, under two moons in one endless sky, a new world grew strong, shaped by kindness, powered by trust, and guided by the simple truth that when aliens had nothing, a human offered everything.